Hello and welcome to week 11's lecture, and it is on R.K. Narayan's A Horse and Two Goats. The title or the angle of interpretation that I am going for in terms of this particular story is Plotting an Ideology, and how through the narrative structure, through this very clever characterization and weaving of the narrative trajectory, R.K. Narayan is able to discuss several aspects of society and the clash between the East and West too. Okay, before we begin, I would like to briefly introduce India's beloved novelist R.K. Narayan. He is originally known as Rasipuram Krishnaswamy Narayan, which he shortened to R.K. Narayan, and he was born in 1906 in Madras, and he died in Madras in 2001, and he is one of the best known Indian writers. And he is very well known for his first work, Swami and Friends, published in 1935. So it's a pre-independence work, and he has constructed this fictional South Indian town called Malgudi, and it has become a very well-known term in many of the households in South India, especially in Tamil Nadu, for more than a generation. So his autobiography is called My Days, published in 1984, and his major works, his major novels include The English Teacher, published in 1945, Waiting for the Mahatma, 1955, The Guide, a very complex psychological novel, was published in 1958, The Man-Eater of Malgudi, 1961, again it's a very menacing tale of a taxidermist, and The Vendor of Sweets, 1967, and A Tiger for Malgudi, 1983. So these are some of his very well known works. Now, the major subjects of interest for R.K. Narayan in his fiction include human eccentricities, and he kind of brings out the intricacies of human bonds, human relationships, and he also discusses the ironies in daily life, and accidents and fate also play a major role in complicating and resolving his fiction. Now, A Horse and Two Goats is a short story that was published in a Madras newspaper called The Hindu in 1960. So this is almost a mid 20th century short fiction, and it was included quite later in another collection of short stories, and he titled the collection A Horse and Two Goats and Other Stories, which was published in 1970, and the same story made another appearance in another collection of R.K. Narayan called the Under the Banyan Tree, which was published in 1985. So this is a very well known work of this particular Indian writer. Now, just to give you a sense of what's going to come in terms of this story, I will do an analysis, a very close analysis of the plot structure and the characterization and the themes, but I would like to give you a heads up as to some of the major concerns that are going to pop up in this particular story, and they are these. The poverty in the village is a major facet that R.K. Narayan introduces, and something that gets somehow marginalized, pushed to the periphery because of the humor that's there in the story, and the humor takes the center stage. But we need to keep an eye out for the poverty in the village and the complications that arise out of it. And there is also mention of a series of famines in the village, and that again suggests a lot of pressures on the people who do not occupy the higher strata of life, and we need to remember that rural India is not a wealthy India, at least in the representation that we have in R.K. Narayan's fiction. And the story is about an old couple, Muni and his wife, and these two figures are very poor, and it is through a narration of their past and the present, and an aspiration for their future, that the poverty of the village, the discriminations that they suffer are brought through by R.K. Narayan. Now, that's one thing, and the unanticipated event that happens to Muni at the end of the story is what kind of lifts the story from a kind of a tragedy and a pessimistic plane to a happy one, because he gets a windfall, a stroke of fortune at the end of the story. He gets a lot of money from an American who passes by. So, so we have the sense that life will turn around, you know, that the wheel will come a full circle. So, if you are at the bottom, you will inevitably come up too. So, that sense of changing fortunes is also indicated in this particular story. So, we have the poverty aspect, we also have the stroke of luck that may befall anyone, and we also get a sense of the contrast between the Indian way of life, which is embedded in the small village called Greedam or Cretam, as it is as it could be pronounced from the story because of the English, the anglicized spelling, Cretam or Greedam, which means crown. So, through that particular village, we get a sense of the way of life of Indian villages, and again the name is a bit ironical, Greedam suggesting wealth and grandeur and power, while there is not a lot of indication of all those aspects of grandeur evident in the life in this particular village. And as I mentioned, we also get a contrast between the Indian way of life and the American way of life, which represents the West. The wealth of the West is contrasted with the traditional faith-bound way of life of the East, where life is simple, but it is also very, very interesting, and it can be humorous too at certain moments. Now, Muni is the central figure for us, and it is through this particular character that R.K. Narayan pushes the story forward. The events that befall him or the activities that he engages in sets the ball rolling. So, the third person narrator is massively invested in this old man Muni. And he used to be a wealthy person some time ago, when he had a flock of 40 sheep and goats, and that gave him a lot of wealth once upon a time, and that once upon a time was before the time of the now with which the story begins. And now Muni is not at all wealthy, it's quite the opposite. He is barely getting by with his life. So, it is a contrast. He has clearly fallen from the high pedestal of fortune, and he is just left with 2 goats, and he is already in debt to the village shopman. And he is also under the mistaken notion that he is 50 years of old, and the shopkeeper corrects him and says that he is most probably 70. So, the ultimate aim of Muni on a daily basis is to get a decent, tasty meal. So, that's all he looks forward to and nothing else. Now, I want to go back to the question of age, because that is an indicator of several other things about this particular character. So, Muni goes to this shopkeeper and he wants to buy a set of ingredients on credit, so that his wife can cook him a drumstick sauce, and he has a real craving to eat that particular dish. And he has no money. Muni has no money, of course, and he is hoping to get some stuff on credit, and he has to humor the shopkeeper in order to get into his good books and get some stuff. So, in this conversation, the question of age comes up, and Muni says that he is 50 years old. He repeated weakly, not being sure of it himself. 50? he always calculated his age from the time of the great famine, when he stood as high as the parapet around the village well. But who could calculate such things accurately nowadays with so many famines occurring? So again, it's very interesting that people in the village, people who are not part of the urban space, calculate their age according to big natural events, climatic events. And this reminds me of other texts that we have read for this story, such as the summer vacation, where Naniyamma calculates the age of her child Amini by a particularly bad storm, and then we have the age of Binya calculated according to the occurrence of a big snowstorm. So again, we have Muni calculating his age according to the big famine that happened ages ago. So this is an indication of how life is unaffected by modern developments, how the villages are somehow intact units which have no interventions from the modern facet that is in the urban spaces. So that's something to be noticed. And the last few words which says that who could calculate such things accurately nowadays with so many famines occurring. So even nature has become so unpredictable, and it has become harsh on the life of the villagers, that even they become uncertain indicators in making an account of life events. So this uncertainty that is there about Muni's age is also associated with the uncertainty that is there in nature, because nature doesn't give these people famine once in every 10 years, once in a particular duration, but quite often. So nature is also unreliable. So this is what he says to the shopkeeper who rejects his calculation and says, you're more likely to be 70, you're older than you claim to be. And Muni, so we have established the fact that he is a much older man, and he has no children. And very interestingly, he lies about a daughter when he tells the shopkeeper that he will get money soon from a daughter who would give him money on his 50th birthday. So which is what provokes this conversation and this set of ideas. So the shopkeeper is a bit struck by that claim, and he says, have you a daughter? And sneering is a very interesting emotion that we have here on the part of the shopman. And we, as the story progresses, we get a sense that barren couples do get a lot of prejudice from the rest of the village folk. So that contempt that is there in the shopman for Muni's inability to have progeny is indicated there. There's a slight hint there, and here we have one of the prejudices that is slightly hinted. Okay, so what Muni does is he gossips with the shopman, as I said, to get into his good books and get some money on credit. Though he is unsuccessful, I mean that narrative is unsuccessful in getting him what he wants. That conversation is very interesting for a couple of reasons. The one thing that immediately comes to my mind is conversation and its power. So Muni thinks that a conversation which kind of endorses the viewpoint of the shopkeeper will make him happy enough to give him stuff on credit. So that power of talk is very interesting, and Muni understands that. So the other thing that is very interesting and significant for us as students of literature is the subject of the conversation between the shopman and Muni. So the shopman suggests that Muni is has the imp in him. He is too much of an imp to even have a second wife, but then the first wife is still around, so that's not possible. And then the conversation again dwells on the elopement of a postman's wife. So if you take a good look at these topics, the topic is sexuality and Muni's sexuality in the first case, and how the shopman, in a manner of fun, suggests that he still has the attraction. There is still the imp in him to have a second wife, and then we have this illicit relationship between the postman's wife and someone else. And there's also the suggestion that the postman is has a bad relationship with the shopkeeper in terms of things being bought by him on credit. So all these stuff which are there in the margins suggest that one of the preoccupations of the village folk are about sexuality and illicit sex. So that is another topic that comes up through the narratives, the small narratives that runs through this particular story world. So the first one is the poverty and the famine, and the second one is the idea of illicit relationships. Now let's go back to this theme of the poverty of Muni and explore this a bit further, because that tells us something about the relationships that he has with the rest of the society in that particular village. And the narrator says that everyone else had more money than Muni, so he seems to be at the bottom of the pyramid, at the bottom of the pecking order on the social ladder in terms of wealth in that particular village. So that in itself is making Muni a lot more self-conscious about his personality, his sense of self, his presence and position in the village. So that's something to be taken note of. And again, this idea is reinforced. He says, I am the poorest fellow in our caste. That particular caste name is not spelt out by the narrator, but he is the poorest in that particular community too. And he says that no wonder that they spurn me, but I won't look at them either. So when he is driving the two goats to make them graze by the highway, there are a bunch of villagers, a group of villagers who are chatting, and they try to get the attention of Muni, but then he wouldn't take notice of them because he's very self-conscious, and he thinks that they are spurning him because of his poverty and he says, I won't look at them either. So there is a lack of genuine connection between the members of the community, the society in this village and Muni, and he is almost glad to get away from them and go to the outskirts. And another aspect that is interesting to understand is that the villagers think if Muni slits their goats' throats, he may have more peace of mind. So that's a significant point of view too, because they think that these goats are the ones that is kind of giving him trouble. So if he gets rid of these goats, he will have more peace of mind. So that seemed to be the attitude of the villagers in terms of Muni's situation. So the goats seem to have been a sort of problem for Muni. So why do they think that? So do they look at the goats as a kind of a bad omen, a curse? And even Muni himself thinks that if they kind of get some disease and if they are out of his sight, if they die, then it would be good riddance. So he has this conflicted attitude towards these goats which are the only property that he owns. Now again, the villagers think that Muni has nothing to worry about. He doesn't have any children. He leads a kind of a bare Spartan existence. So they don't have anything to worry about, Muni and his wife. So this is the statement that the narrator offers to tell us about the point of view of the villagers. What has he to worry about anyway? They live on nothing and have nobody to worry about. So, this set of ideas again reminded me of the shroud. They especially reminded me of Gisu and Madhav, who live on nothing, almost nothing, and they have nobody to worry about. So even when Vidya is around, they don't actually worry about her well-being. So the bare existence and the minimum subsistence of Muni and his wife remind me of Premchand's characters, and these two figures are almost insignificant in terms of the perspective of the villagers. So they are on the margins, and even the house is at the very end of that particular street, so literally the last in line. So again, the villagers think that they have no obligations, they have no children, they have no property, they don't even have sizable food on a daily basis. So why should we care about them? That seems to be the attitude going about in Greedom in this particular story. And we have also noticed a slight prejudice against the barren couple early on, and that is reinforced again. So just because you don't have children doesn't mean your suffering is all right, or your suffering is somehow immaterial or insignificant. So that idea seems to be suggested through this story in a critical fashion. Okay, so we have the past of Muni as an embedded narrative as the story progresses. So the past, which tells us that Muni was an influential figure some time ago, ages ago, is introduced a bit late as the story develops. And the narrator tells us that he was very wealthy because of his flock of sheep. The fleece of the sheep were much sought after, and there was a famous butcher who used to come by and get the stuff from Muni, and in return he also gave him a lot of betel leaves, tobacco and bhang, a kind of a stimulant and addictive substance to smoke, and that's a very interesting aspect of his life in the past. After a smoke, one felt light and elated and inclined to forgive everyone, including that brother-in-law of his who had once tried to set fire to his home. That particular substance, bhang, when Muni smoked it with this butcher far away in a hut, unknown to the wives and well-wishers, it gave me a great sense of elation, and he was inclined to forgive almost everybody, including that brother-in-law who tried to set fire to his home. That's a very interesting incident from his past, and our question should be, why on earth did the brother-in-law try to set fire to Muni's house? What could be the motive for such a bizarre action? Was the brother-in-law unsound of mind, or was he angry with Muni for some reason? So all these motives are not mentioned in the narrative, and that gives us a room for a lot of speculation. And I'm trying to connect this slight suggestion of the friction in relationship between the brother-in-law and Muni to Muni's relationship with his wife, and the narrator mentions early on that he had thrashed his wife a few times quite early in their relationship, quite early in their marriage. And I was just wondering whether was that the cause for the brother-in-law trying to set fire to Muni's house. It's a bit of a stretch, but then I'm just trying to work it out in terms of the clues that are there in the story. And then there's also another suggestion made by the shopkeeper who says that Muni has enough of the imp, the mischievous psyche in him, the mischievous character in him, to go after another wife. So was this again this characteristic of Muni that was a bit of a problem in those days, and was the brother-in-law angry about it, and was that the reason for setting fire to him, or was this aspect of the brother-in-law born out of the jealousy he had for his for Muni because he was extremely wealthy. So there are so many things that we can think about in terms of this particular information that we get from the embedded narrative. Now the narrator says that, but all this seemed like the memoirs of a previous birth. So it's so much in the past. All these set of events are so much in the past. It's almost as if it is part of a memoir of a previous birth. It's as if it doesn't even belong to this particular birth of Muni. And some pestilence afflicted his cattle. He could of course guess who had laid his animals under a curse, and even the friendly butcher would not touch one at half the price, and now he was left with the two scraggy creatures. So we have a brief description about the fall of Muni, and that fall is related to the pestilence, the disease, the contagious disease that affected his cattle, his sheep. So one after the other his cattle died due to some unknown disease, and importantly Muni believes that that could have been because of a curse, and he almost knows who had put his animals under curse, and we can reasonably speculate and say that Muni thinks that it is his brother-in-law. So immediately there is a fall in fortune on the part of Muni, and he is just left with two scraggy creatures, thin emaciated creatures, after that pestilence which had struck his sheep. So the important stuff, the important aspects that we can pick from that particular narrative and related narratives is this. Muni does believe in curses, he believes in superstition as well, and the village folk also think of these two goats as some sort of evil presence, some sort of unlucky presence which does not give him a lot of peace. Perhaps they are reminders of the wealth that he had once upon a time, and which is why he almost kind of sneaks by the rest of the villagers when he is driving those goats to graze at the outskirts near the highway. So he has a sense of shame and guilt and embarrassment, which could also be the reason for his sort of unhealthy relationship with the villagers. So that blame could be shared between Muni and the rest of the village folk too. Now, let us quickly look at the role of Muni's wife. She is a very interesting character, and the narrator says that she is 2 years younger than him, and as I mentioned before, Muni does beat her up, but only a few times in their marriage, and that was before and now, and later Muni says that she had the upper hand. So it's a funny comic attitude that Muni has, but then it's also very interesting that there is domestic abuse, there is violence in marriage for Muni, violence in marriage for Muni's wife, and that's something to be noted. And it's also interesting to note that she does get the upper hand eventually, and that is a very interesting thing in itself. Why does she get the upper hand, and how did she get the upper hand? So these are interesting questions, and answers to which would throw a lot of light on the life of Muni. But again, this is a short story, and we do just get glimpses of the psyche and the soul and the life of the village in which Muni inhabits. And the narrator says that she was old, but he was older and needed all the attention she could give him in order to be kept alive. Muni has to do the necessary to keep her husband alive, because that's her job, that's her responsibility in a traditional Indian society, to sustain the husband, to keep him alive as long as possible, to tend to him, to take care of him. And she does it in a strange manner, but she does it anyway. And she is also, as I said, and as the narrator tells us, that she does have the upper hand in the relationship, in the sense that she puts him in his place, she mocks him, she reprimands him, and when Muni asks for drumstick sauce, she mocks his desire and says that he only has 4 teeth and he has big desires. So it's a very interesting comment, but a comment which also tells us a lot about the wife's character and nature. So she is also apparently very hot tempered, and when Muni asks for that particular sauce, and there is no ingredient at home, and when Muni also couldn't get any stuff on credit from the shop, she angrily advises him to fast for the day. And interestingly, Muni knows his wife very well, and he thinks that the best strategy is not to irritate her or annoy her, and he's also even slightly afraid of her. So what he does is he quickly agrees, and the narrator says that the wife could be very undependable in the morning, very temperamental in the morning. You cannot predict her mood, and as the day goes by, her mood does improve. It's an interesting characterization, but on the other hand, this could be a cliche too, in the sense that Indian wives are very unpredictable, easily annoyed, irritated. They have a brash exterior, but heart of hearts, they do meet the needs and demands and desires of the husband. So that cliche also comes to my mind when I look at the characterization of Muni. So and Muni knows that she would surely go out and work, grind corn in the big house, sweep or scrub somewhere, earn enough to buy foodstuff and keep a dinner ready for him in the evening. So she could mock him, she can get angry, annoyed, she can shout at him, tell him off, but at the end of the day, she would have prepared a dinner and kept it ready for the husband to partake of it. And how would she source the food materials? She would sweep or do some work somewhere or she would grind corn in the big house, and she would engage herself in lots of labor to make sure that there is food for the husband. And this particular description of Muni's wife reminded me once again of these two figures from Summer Vacation, Nani Amma, who goes to grind owl for the grandmother Mutashi, and I'm also reminded of Budya, who does grind corn in the village so that she could fill the shameless stomachs of her relatives. So the women as the laborers, the women as the kind of caretakers of the men in the household is a theme that is communicated through the narratives that we have read for this course. So at one point, the narrator also tells us that Muni knows that his wife would scrounge or manage to get some food at the end of the day. And the word scrounge is a very interesting word, because the meaning of it suggests that food is obtained, food especially is obtained, or even money at the expense or through the generosity of others. So there's a lot of charity involved, or it could be done by stealth too. So that word is pretty significant in this context. And again, I'm reminded of Nani Amma, who tries to steal from Mutashi stuff of a tamarind that she hides underneath the rice that she carries. So all these are interesting ideas that come through when we pay close attention to the meaning of words and their application of it in particular contexts. So what is apparent is that there is a massive burden on her shoulders, and that burden is about looking after her husband. And this old woman working in the big house is also very interesting. So no matter how old you are, you have to do some work to get by. So there is no retirement from work in the villages, and that's kind of suggested in the story from the mid 20th century. So the woman has to be constantly productive. She has to interact with the rest of the society, the village society, in order to be productive, whereas Muni can quietly sneak away with the 2 goats so that he can just go to that space near the highway and look at stuff that moves on the big road. So Muni's role is kind of similar. Muni's wife's role is similar to Budhya's in the shroud, and both the women try to put food on the plate for their menfolk. So Muni is on the outskirts while the wife slaves away inside the big house. So what does he do when he is on that pedestal, the interesting pedestal which has a big life-sized horse, statue of a horse, a clay horse, and the statue of a warrior. So he sits on that pedestal and watches the vehicles on the highway, and he knows by the appearance of a particular vehicle down the road that it's time to go home and enjoy the meal that the wife has prepared. And his presence on the highway or by the side of the highway gives him a great sense of peace, because he does get a sense of belonging to a larger world. He realizes that this village is connected to other networks on this big world, and that gives him a sense of contentment which is not there for him inside the village. So Muni sits on the pedestal of this statue all day long, and he kind of moves about. There's enough space on the pedestal to move about according to the sunlight that he gets from the sun. So he moves to particular spots in order to get away from the sun, the harshness of the sun, and he also sometimes sits under the belly of the horse to get a bit of shade. So it's very interesting in the sense that the pedestal itself becomes the home for this man, this old man. So he doesn't spend a lot of time indoors inside his hut. We do not get a picture of him, quite a extended picture of him inside his hut, but we do get a sense that this clay horse and the warrior somehow provide that comfort and warmth and protection from the elements for this old man. In another sense, the pedestal also becomes his throne, Muni's throne. So because he gets a high vantage point and he sits there and looks at all the stuff that's going on about him. So what about the statue of the horse? It is life-sized. It's a big statue, and it's made of clay, baked and burnt and brightly colored, and it is in the rearing position. So the 4 legs are in the air. So it's a kind of, it has a military air to that statue. And again, there is a warrior as well with big mustaches and eyes, and the narrator comments that in those days, in order to make a man scary, they made big mustaches and bulging eyes to indicate bravery and courage. So so he sits at this particular spot every day. And there is a very interesting set of description about the statue of the horse, and the narrator says that the horse itself was said to have been as white as a thobe washed sheet, and had on its back a cover of pure brocade of red and black lace, matching the multicolored sash around the waist of the warrior. But none in the village remembered the splendor, as no one noticed its existence. Even Muni, who spent all his waking hours at its foot, never bothered to look up. So this is an extraordinary set of statues in terms of its artistic and attractive and aesthetic merit is concerned. And in fact, once the horse had a kind of a cover which was as white as a adobe washed sheet, and it had a kind of a cover of pure brocade of red and black lace, and which matched with the sash of the warrior. So the horse and the warrior are of a piece. They go together in the sense the horse is that of the warriors, but all the attractive aspects of the horse is not noticed by the village folk, because they don't have the time to enjoy the splendor. They are so preoccupied with their own concerns and daily pressures that they don't notice it. And even Muni, who spent a lot of his time at its foot, never bothered to look up and see what are the features of this particular clay horse. So it is a very interesting gap on the part of the cultural side of this bunch of villages. Now, this particular statue once bordered the village, but now since the village has moved further away, this horse is now at the outskirts and near the highway, and the narrative suggests that it could be due to drought, or it could be due to the building of a highway, and these reasons could have pushed the villagers to move away from this horse's statue. But these two suggest, one suggests natural intervention. Nature has become very harsh, therefore no rain, and the people have to move away to get water and other stuff. And then the other is the man-made intervention, the highway that's been built, and that particular activity chases the villagers away. So these are the two reasons, potential reasons for the village kind of distancing itself from this clay horse and the warrior. But nevertheless, this statue, these statues are safe from the vandals of the village, because they do not scribble, etch, or make any marks on the body of these two statues, and the narrator is surprised by that fact, because the vandals use the walls to make vulgar comments, and they kind of use the knives to even make marks on the trees in the village. So the way this statue retains its pristine condition could be due to a particular reason, and that reason becomes clear later on as the story progresses. Now, the complication in the story happens when we have a foreigner on the scene. So, the arrival of a foreigner complicates the peaceful existence of Muni, and he arrives on the scene because his vehicle breaks down for lack of fuel, and he comes looking for help, and he stops for a chat with Muni, and he wears khaki, and he's an American, and he's quite struck by the statue of the horse, and he constantly says marvelous, marvelous, this is an absolutely marvelous statue. Now, Muni is forced to offer an introduction about himself, and he does it through claiming ownership of the two goats that are grazing nearby, and he points at them, and the American looked faithfully in the direction indicated by Muni's fingers, gazed for a while at the two goats and the rocks, and with a puzzled expression took out his silver cigarette case and lit a cigarette. So this American obligingly looks at the direction pointed at by Muni, and he lights a cigarette, and he also offers a cigarette to Muni, and that breaks the ice, and that takes the fear out of Muni's mind about this particular American who wears khaki, and that cloth is a scary outfit for Muni. there's a lot of humor in the encounter between Muni and the American. Muni at first thinks of running away because he looks at this American as either a policeman or a soldier, and he has this notion that one should be beware, or one should be kind of be aware of khaki wearing men. And the only conversation in English that Muni has is yes, no, uttered one after the other. It's a very paradoxical word, set of words there. Yes meaning agreement, no disagreement. So yes, agree and disagree in the same sentence is very, very interesting and hilarious. So Muni has worked out a strategy very quickly to deal with this khaki wearing scary American. So he decides that he is going to talk his way out of the problem, which has come in the figure of this American, and he realizes that he has to do this conversation thing because at 70 he can't run away. He doesn't have the energy or the stamina or the physical strength to run, and he is going to depend on his chaste thumber and entertain the visitor and get away from him. So the American offers his card, his visiting card, to Muni as part of his introduction, and that is seen as a warrant for his arrest, and he is terrified. And what he does is, even though he is terrified, he is kind of confident enough to trust in his conversational abilities, and he talks about a murder that took place in the border between Gridam and Kuppam, the two villages that are adjacent to each other. And he says that there was a mutilated body found beneath the tamarind tree between these two villages, and while he narrates this set of gory events, the American listens courteously, though he understood nothing, which is quite understandable. He doesn't understand a word of Tamil, and he has been getting by with his English across the Indian continent, and all he is interested in is the clay horse, and he points to the horse and tries to talk about it. So Muni funnily doesn't understand the intentions of the visitor, and he continues with his narrative about about the capture of any bad characters hanging about the village, and he says that he would definitely bury him to his neck in a coconut pit if he tried to escape. So this imaginary bad character would be caught and tied up in this interesting fashion. And he also suggests, Muni also very confidently suggests that the other village is the one that is to blame for this particular murder, because their village has a clean record. And what's interesting about this is that the fault is always the others. The blame is laid at the feet of the figure of the other, and Muni does that quite effectively in this particular episode. So the complication in the story is humorous because we have two men, one Indian old man, and we have an American probably in a middle-aged figure, and we see them talking at cross purposes. And the American tries to talk about his life in New York, and how one day he had a power cut in his place of work, and how that was a terrible time. He didn't have any air conditioning, he didn't have any lift to use to go up and down. So all these tiny details, interesting details, which apparently is a big event in his life, he talks about them to Muni. And while Muni talks about his life in Gridam, his past and his Hindu beliefs, so we have two different worlds, living cheek by jowl in these narratives offered by these two different men. And they're not having a conversation, they're just voicing out, spelling out narratives of their lives. And and the American is desperate. He asks, is there a translator around who could communicate his desires to Muni? And the very interesting question that he asks is this, and he asks Muni, do you have any religious or spiritual scruples that prevent him from talking in English? Because he's absolutely certain that Muni could understand English, but he deliberately refuses to communicate to him in English, perhaps because of his religious or spiritual reasons, which is preventing him from using the English language. So, the very interesting question to ask, because this American has a sense that the Hindus, the religious folk on the land of this Indian continent are dictated, disciplined and ordered by all these religious and spiritual matters, and language is one of them too, probably. That is what his assumption is about behind that particular question. Thank you for watching. I will continue in the next session.